Great. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. This is the start of day 2 of Grad Launch. Yesterday was amazing. I hope you guys tuned into a bunch and learned a lot. So this is our second day. This panel is called Working for Good, Nonprofit and Social Justice. Very timely in terms of what we're all living through right now, and everyone's wondering, what can I do, to help? And maybe this is a career path that you would like to take. So we did pull together a really interesting panel, all ITP alumni. And I'll turn it over to James if you want to maybe introduce yourself, and then we can go through the panelists and they can introduce one another. But thanks again. Please feel free to tune in to the rest of the schedule. We have an event every hour up through 8 o'clock. And then there's the graduation party for those of you who are graduating. That's at 8 o'clock tonight. Okay. Thanks to James, Edwin, and Brian, and hopefully Christina will be logging in shortly. Thanks for your time.
With that said, my name is James Richardson. I'm an associate professor of new media technology at LaGuardia Community College. I've been involved in issues surrounding social justice and issues particularly pertaining to the Black community for a number of years. My ITP thesis project back in 1999 was to create a virtual space for African Americans to congregate and talk within a digital realm. So this is an area of issues that is very near and dear to me. So I'm very glad that we have a panel today, a very diverse panel of entrepreneurs, of social justice warriors, for lack of a better term, who generally can talk to some of the experiences they've had post ITP and working in the areas of nonprofit and social justice. So I'm going to ask our two panelists to introduce themselves. We have Brian Nunez and Edwin Reed Sanchez. So I'm going to ask you guys to just talk a little bit about who you are, what year you graduated from ITP, and a little bit about the company and the organizations that you're currently in. And why don't we start with Brian?
Great, thanks, James. My name is Brian Nunez. I guess technically I'm class of 97, which is way back. I remember when Midori started. So
I had just started, yeah, exactly.
So that's a long ass time ago. So I took a pretty regular sort of ITP career path up until around 9/11. So I did the whole startup thing, Silicon Alley, worked in the for-profit sector, designed websites, managed servers, lived in a co-location facility for many nights back in the day. And then at some point, this is even before 9/11 happened, I just kind of got disillusioned with the whole situation, where at some point one day I woke up and said, I just can't sell shit on the internet anymore. And so I took some time off and went and visited my sister, who was in Hawaii at the time. And that was August of 2001. And I came back in early September of 2001. And then all that stuff went down. And I was like, I can't go back to doing what it was I was doing before. As fate would have it, another ITP alumni, Louis Spitzer, his partner ran an organization called Witness, which is a human rights organization based in downtown Manhattan at the time, that was sort of like technology related. They did a lot of video documentation of human rights. abuses, but they were pretty much like documentarians. They didn't have a whole lot of like technical chops, so they needed someone to help them apply for a grant to increase their technology abilities. So I helped them out with that. That was like 2002, and then I caught the bug. I was like, I can do tech, and um, uh, I don't have to work a day job to do it. There's actually a need for this type of skill set. It took a long time. I mean, it wasn't probably until 10 years later that we started to see a real hunger within the nonprofit and social justice field for the sort of tech skills that you guys have. Um, and early on, it was a big struggle to sort of convince people that who were working leadership of nonprofit organizations that they needed to invest in technology. So I was at Witness for a little over 10 years, where we went from a handful of computers and an Avid editing station, back when they had those, editing on Betamax, and I saw the transition from Betamax to digital video. And then when I ended up leaving, I sort of caught the bug to do more tech, and then ended up working with a group called the Guardian Project. Some of you may know Nathan Freitas, who sometimes teaches at ITP as well. So he has a little collective of technologists and programmers, and we did security software for mobile phones, specifically for activists, and people who are working in sort of challenging situations where security is an important part of sort of keeping yourself and your network safe. Then I realized, like, after a couple of years of doing that that there are lots of people who are better at that sort of stuff than I am. And my main goal was to see how I could add my general knowledge of technology and try and connect technology and resources to as many human rights groups as possible, which led me to the Open Society Foundation, which is one of the largest, I think it might be actually the largest human rights funder in the world, with a budget of just under $1 billion per year. And I started the sort of first human rights and technology portfolio there about 5 years ago, where my main job is to sort of have a bird's eye view of what's happening in the technology and human rights space, and try to support groups that both need to improve their technology skills, or are building cool and needed technologies for the human rights movement. And then I'll just end my section with a sort of pitch. So over the course of my career, what's been really clear is that even though you may be in a situation or within the nonprofit or the social justice field where technology isn't sort of prioritized, like there are lots of important things that need to be prioritized in that work, but technology has to be part of that conversation. I've seen it throughout my career where groups are sort of they're left behind. They're working sort of 2 or 3 years behind the curve, and the people who are working against them have an upper hand. And I think that's continuing to be the case. So as we move forward in the sort of COVID and post-COVID reality, we're going to need folks like you to sort of be the resource and the leaders for the people who are trying to do good things in the world, so that they don't get sort of rolled over by the folks who either purposely or unintentionally sort of steamroll their way through by rolling out tech that isn't in everyone's best interests. And I'll leave it there.
That's a perfect segue for Edwin, I suspect, whose company he's going to speak to in a few minutes. Tell us a little bit about your company. I know you also are, your company is kind of centered around bringing technology or bringing access to groups of people who generally have been a little bit more disenfranchised in terms of the communication and facilities in terms of mobile access. So with that said, Edwin, tell us a little bit about who you are and your company.
Yeah, sure. I actually got a big caravan outside, but hopefully it doesn't sound too bad. Let me see. Can I share my screen actually, or
Yeah, you should be able to share.
uh, speaker view? Okay.
It's usually at the bottom of the screen. It's like that green thing. Yeah,
Is
there
that
you
it?
go.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Let me close this window. I'm not sure what that is, but can you guys hear me all right?
You're fine.
Okay, so yeah, so my name is Edwin Reed Sanchez. I'm the founder of StayCell, which is a social venture, and we think of ourselves as putting communications where it's needed most. We sort of focused on environments that are very difficult to connect, whether it's environmentally difficult or socially challenging. We enjoy the experience of trying to make connectivity happen in these remote areas, or sometimes they're not even that remote. But so this is actually in Nicaragua. This is one of our first installations that we did. And then I also currently am working on a project in Black Rock Forest, which is about an hour north of New York City, doing a Wi-Fi mesh network there for field stations and scientific research. That one is more based on the idea or trying to connect an area that's heavily forested, which had very difficult challenges in itself. But it's a project that's funded by the National Science Foundation, and that's those two things have been my major focus as a company. So I got my start at ITP, like all of us here, which is a great thing. While at ITP, I guess I graduated in 2015. So while at ITP, I got really, really obsessed with communications, and I took any class that had to do with communications. I was there. So first I started with Redial, which is a class on telephony. It's learning some of that old school technology, which it's kind of nice at ITP. There's always a plethora of classes that you won't find anywhere else, and this was one of them. And I got really obsessed with understanding how old technology works, and also how we could apply some of these older technologies to modern day problems. So that led me to Towers of Power, which was really about GSM cellular infrastructure and using open source tools to create cellular networks. I eventually actually taught this class later in life, which is a joy for me as well. And basically, I just figured out how to set up my own little cellular network through many nights of staying up late at night and trying to figure it out. And as usual, ITB had some old equipment available. This software-defined radio that had some dust on it that nobody's been using for years. And I was able to hook it up to a Linux machine, and then started making phone calls to myself. with a cellular phone. It was like I could text myself, I could call myself. It was it was very satisfying to actually be able to do that, even though it's just to myself. But so that led me to wanting to do a project for my thesis around open source cellular networks, and I decided to do it in Nicaragua. And previously, I'd run a multimedia center in Bluefields, Nicaragua, which is on the Caribbean coast. We had, we did computer programming, audio and visual, multimedia, teaching people how to use the software, create their own basic websites. And I did that for about 8 years of my life prior to going to ITP. And we were located on the Atlantic region of Nicaragua, which is mostly Afro-descendant and indigenous, and had very limited communications in many of the more indigenous communities. And there's no roads that go to the different communities up and down the coast. And actually, the road that goes to the capital was just finished maybe 2 years ago. And this is a major town. It's a city, really. So it has about 80,000 people in Bluefields, but it's still very disconnected from the rest of the country. And in many ways, disconnected from the rest of the world. All travel is done by boat, and these kind of boats from town to town. They have a long history of as an indigenous region. They were at one point part of the British Protectorate, and had a Mosquito king, an indigenous king. They eventually got taken over by the Nicaraguans and the Spanish culture, but initially they speak English. They speak, you walk around Bluefields, there's a lot of different indigenous groups still there speaking their native languages of Mosquito, Ulua. So it's a very eclectic place on the Caribbean coast. But one of the major things that we found as we were developing projects with these communities is that, it's a pretty impoverished place. People don't really have money even for their own cell phone bills. So just to do projects, we would have to pay for people's cell phone bills, and everybody has prepaid. And we're talking about the companies there at the time were charging up to 50 cents a minute for per phone calls. And that's like an incredible amount of money. And, you have like teachers making $200 a month. So just the ability to communicate, if there was connectivity, was a financial struggle. And these are some of the communities that didn't have any type of communications at all. And so part of my thesis was to install a community cellular network, working with a local radio station, a community radio station on the island of Little Corn Island, which is just a small island off the Caribbean coast there. And I had a previous relationship with the radio station because I had had the multimedia center for several years. And then that led to us opening up another community cellular network in a place called Pearl Lagoon. And eventually I won the Stern Entrepreneurial Challenge at NYU, which was pretty exciting to get that huge check. And everything sort of just snowballed, like from there we got an investment from Unicef Innovation Fund, which allowed us to do the second installation on the coast there. That was our Dubai trip. And, it's kind of amazing that, I was able to participate in this Unicef Innovation Fund. And, this is from where we were having our meetings, looking out at the skyline of Dubai, which looks like you're in the future. And then this is the reality of the place that we're installing these kind of networks. And so that cellular project went on for about 3 years. We've had some challenges, and actually we deactivated a basic cellular connectivity is now available in places that we were originally connecting. And also it's there's a social aspect to cellular connectivity that you have to sort of integrate people into. And there was some level of distrust. Like, how can you do this? How can you actually make things work on a cellular phone? And not very much income that we were able to produce from these community cellular networks. It was hard to be sustainable. And by that time, by 2017, and we were only offering 2G voice and text services. So since then we've transitioned, because there's still a real problem with the internet penetration rate. So you're talking about like a 27% internet penetration rate in some of these regions where we're working in. And yet there's a fiber optic line, a subsea cable system that goes right to Bluefields. And this is actually where the fiber line lands. So, it looks like a mess, but this is actually the fastest internet in the country. And yet that region is still, mostly disconnected. So at that point, we sort of pivoted to doing a fiber to the home connection, and started a fiber ISP in Bluefields. And right now, we have a customer base in Bluefields and are working towards building out another fiber network in the other communities of Pearl Lagoon, where we previously had the cellular phone network. And that's where we are now. And then myself, besides having that company that I run in Nicaragua, I'm also actively involved in a lot of other community network projects. We did one in Olekasasi, Kenya. And part of that process is, we get the equipment, we work with local community members, teach them how to use it so that they can provide network connectivity where they're in the place they live. This is in Puerto Rico. We also did a workshop post Hurricane Maria, basically teaching them how to run an ad hoc network if they needed it after a disaster. And now we're beta testing local applications. So Lightlist, which originally was called OtherNet, and was Drew Marotra's thesis project at ITP. He created the idea for these local applications, and this was this first iteration of we did it, and then we're improving on it, and we're still working on it. And the idea is to have these local applications because the internet is still quite expensive. Like access to backhaul internet, access to the greater world is still very expensive, even for an ISP like ourselves. And so the idea is to build out these local applications so that people can communicate and operate locally, especially now in times where we're trying to stay connected but not close together, or no touch, I guess is what they're calling it now. And so there's a cost to internet, but if you're running all the services locally, you really dramatically lower the cost and can offer really free basic services. And it's also helpful because even in Bluefields, there is still disconnectivity from the broader internet. And that's because most of the internet comes from the capital. Even though there's a port or there's a landing station right there in Bluefields, it's not distributed locally. It's first sent to the capital and then redistributed back to the coast. And we're still at a point where, as a company, we can't afford that direct connection yet. And so it's a challenge. But amazingly, despite what has gone on now with COVID-19, and then previously about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, there was a lot of political instability in the country. There was blockades on the street. The whole country was pretty much paralyzed for about 3, 4, 5 months. But that's when I just started doing the fiber to the home connections. And amazingly, we found, while many companies were closing their doors, we were actually gaining a lot of traction, and people really do value the internet and connectivity, and we're able to survive and really, grow in these times. And so, so that's a little bit about what I do. We have a GitHub and my website, so if people want to check it out, they can definitely check that out.
I got a quick question. Did you have a lot of issues in terms of negotiating like right of way and especially for the fiber connections and particularly do you have any type of kind of like backup in the event of, like you had mentioned, like natural disasters like flooding or like backhoes? Is anything like Sonnet or like something that self-corrects in those areas, or are you basically a little bit more is a little bit more basic in terms of just a base straight fiber connection.
Okay, so the first question in terms of right of way with fiber, we actually partnered with a local cable TV company and then bought access to their existing fiber. So they, have like 12 strand fiber. They use one strand. We bought access to half their strands. And that way we were able to, cover the city very quickly and not deal with these right of way issues. And really, it's not that difficult. You just rent the poles from the electrical company. There's a price per year, and then you can run any cable you want. That part is not difficult. What's more challenging, or what was the most challenging, was just getting the license. So the license itself took us like maybe 2.5 years to get. And it's just like you have to go to the office, talk to people, show your face. It's a political mechanism that you have to not really grease the wheels, but you just got to be there. So that, and then there's regulations for the use of point-to-point Wi-Fi, which in many places, if you use 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, there's no licensing fee. In Nicaragua, there is. So you have to also apply for that license and then pay for it, which is a yearly fee. It's not much, but it is something. So it's something you have to deal with. And then your second question, what was your second question?
In terms of like backup connections, in terms of like, like Sonnet or some of the other technologies that help reroute connections in the event that there is an outage.
So we only have one major backhaul provider. So we still do have some disruptions on occasion because that's along the road to the capital. The best we can do at this time, what we do is, we have like a 4G connection that we use if there's a disconnection. But really, I mean, at that point, it's just like everybody gets lowered to kilobits per second. It's literally just like in the event that these connections go out for a long amount of time, we'll do that. Otherwise, people have a tolerance for not having connectivity for an hour or two, or even half a day. Sometimes you'll have problems because the whole town doesn't have electricity. And that means that your backhaul provider somewhere down the line, like one of their repeaters is off. So you can have connectivity problems for that. There's like a lot of problems. So people do have some flexibility with that. We've been working on trying to get connectivity from the fiber optic network, the subsea cable system. But you're talking about like, they want minimum of $5,000 for installation, and then
So it's a complex process. I'm sorry to take you off on that tangent. I'm an old telecom dude. That was like something I did in a previous life, and it's sorry about that.
No, it's all right.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish up.
No, that's it. It's a complicated process, and we've been trying to figure out a way to get that connection to what's called Columbus networks or CNW networks, but have not been successful yet.
Cool.
But hopefully in the coming year or so, we'll have that connection.
With that said, I think I saw Christine Goodness jump in. I saw her pop into Christine. Are you there?
I'm here. Yes.
Edwin, can you unshare your screen?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
Actually.
I think it's
there. We go.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, Christine, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, when you graduated from ITP, and your position at the UN in terms of the Department of Peace Building, and how you kind of came to that?
Okay. Yes, that'd be great. So maybe just a little bit about my background. I'm from Hawaii. I grew up for part of my childhood in a house that had no electricity and no television. We had running water through a hose. So I come to the whole domain of technology assuming there is nothing, and assuming that the fundamentals are really some of the most important parts of using technology, sort of the fundamentals of human life are some of the most important parts of using technology. If we don't use our most advanced technologies to ensure that the fundamentals are addressed, I really I'm a big skeptic, for example, of endless apps that are solutions in search of problems, because God knows we have a lot of problems in this world and they really need some extra help. Um, so that's just a little bit about me personally. I also was brought up in a very political family, very politically active. As undergrad, I studied Latin American studies and art, so very multidisciplinary right out the bat, and just happened to sort of come of age at the dawn of the web. Uh, I actually applied to ITP, I think in 1995, and was rejected. And so I applied again after, sort of self-teaching, I'd say, in the dot-com boom during the mid to late 90s. Applied again just after 9/11 because I felt like after working in essentially technology and management consulting firms that I really didn't want to be part of the problem anymore. As I lived in my apartment in Lower Manhattan and saw the consequences of, I think, as technologists and engineers, maybe and only speaking for myself, but not necessarily having kind of a coherent picture about how tools are used and ethical frameworks are used together and how we express our values in the tools that we create. And I've always said to my students, which when I'm lucky to teach at ITP, I always say, be your own master, because otherwise you are a human tool. So let's be cognizant about the way that we create tools for others and their agendas, lest we become an instrument ourselves. So maybe just so at ITP, just to be specific about what I did there, I took a variety of different courses. In the end, my thesis was building an annotation engine for Mozilla. I used an open source library called oh no, it was called Mozilla. It was for the Mozilla browser. I was really interested in the way that people create meaning together and build language together. So it was a kind of a social network that you could create in a classroom so that you could look at the same sources and tag them and then have conversations around like the common building of knowledge, essentially. I took a good amount of courses in cognitive science as well while I was at NYU, and supplemented, not just the more serious stuff, but like I took toy design, this kind of stuff. So tried to really keep it fun as well as being, eyes on the goal. I actually was, it was serendipitous, I think, at the time that the summer between my 2 years, there was another student who had previously been a consultant at the UN and had posted a random job announcement for like a 3-month contract to build a tiny little website. But as they say, one thing led to another, and just continued to do really excellent prototyping, research, create mostly websites at first, but then because of my multidisciplinary background, was able to really kind of weave together in in a way that was, I think, unusual for this giant bureaucracy, how tools can best be used by what you might call a technophobic class of political officers here. I now serve as the Chief of Information Management in that supports actually 2 undersecretary generals, 2 departments. One is the Department of Peacebuilding and Political Affairs, and they're essentially the political desk that cover all countries in the world and track conflict. And the other is the Department of Peace Operations, traditionally understood as peacekeeping, or the Blue Helmets, those who are serving in missions mandated by the Security Council all over the world, from Darfur to Afghanistan, essentially an instrument of the Security Council to hold the peace after the outbreak of war, or to, in other ways, creative ways, sort of support the peace and security agenda of the UN. So what I've also, as I mentioned, I've been lucky to teach some classes at ITP. I think I started in 2010, where what I basically do is, and this is something for anybody who wants to continue their relationship with ITP after they graduate, is I essentially pitched classes to ITP afterwards, where I found that there was a specific research topic or a kind of a cluster of stuff that I just needed to figure out. And then I used that opportunity when the class was accepted, if it was accepted and had enough enrollment, um, to then dedicate myself to that research, figure out a complex set of technical topics and policy topics. Like, I'm one of these people that I'm not a frontline developer anymore. I'm more advising at a policy and strategy level, but I also have an innovation capacity, so I can do rapid prototyping. But so when we're looking at how to use social media analysis to understand the dynamics of the conflict in Syria, I might break it down into sort of subsets of that problem, and then essentially pitch ITP a class to force myself almost to focus, do the research, and then immediately teach and discuss about it, and be really open to being, wrong about some things, or just have really robust conversation. So I think I taught a class originally I called it Technology for Revolution. That title was not accepted by my bosses at the UN, because I suppose as UN staffers, we're not supposed to be
revolutionary
against our bosses for the 193 states. So I think I called it in the end Technology for Social and Political Change, or something really boring like that. But anyway, we all knew what we were talking about. Then another class I taught was called Online Identity and Evasion. So also how to mask your identity, and also how to play with it, and why that's useful, and why anonymity is useful. And then I think during the ITP camp, I did a short one on open government data. So, as we were beginning to open up all this open government streams, how to use that, how to connect via API, use JSON, etc. And then finally, for the past couple of years, not this year, but previously, I taught a class called What Happens When the Internet Dies, looking at it from a couple of different perspectives, not purely technical, but also social and cultural, political, sort of the culture of the internet. What happens when the internet dies, either during crisis or deliberate government shutdowns, of course, or otherwise being disillusioned with the internet and not being alive for you anymore. So from a variety of, probably a couple of different perspectives. I didn't prepare any presentation. I'm so sorry. I am actually directly immersed in the COVID field response crisis group. So I'm the information advisor for that. And I was even late to this for a few minutes. I really do apologize.
It's not a problem.
I'm like jumping from meeting to meeting these days. But I could share my screen to show you a couple of key things that I'm working on right now to illustrate. These are like big abstract things, like what are you really doing over there? I can share my screen to show you maybe a couple of things, if I can figure out how to do this.
Could we just, because we're running a little short on time, I just want to make sure that I have some time left so that people can ask questions. I did want to ask questions of all of you guys, something that I think would benefit the graduates or potential graduates who are looking to move on afterwards. So I'd like to find out from you guys, particularly, what satisfaction do you get from going into this line of work? And what would you say to graduates who are considering working with nonprofits, working for startups that help basically sometimes the disenfranchised become part of the larger society? Because one of the concerns that I think a lot of potential graduates may have about this is, can I make a living? They want to basically help, but they're also worried about, can I help and also maintain a relatively decent standard of living? So I'd like to just open that up for you guys to maybe talk to those points if possible.
Maybe one of you two want to go first, because I think for the UN, it's not a startup, so it's a little bit more stable. Maybe you guys want to comment on this one specifically.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that was a concern. For me, I just never really. For me, it's just about solving problems, I guess, and I think I worked hard after ITP to win the entrepreneurial award. I think had I not won that award, I probably would have gone in a different direction. I wouldn't have had that ability to really try to forge on forward with what the work I was doing. But I think sometimes, if you're passionate enough about a project, if you have the dedication to go the long haul, these opportunities present themselves when you need them most, and eventually it just sort of works out. But there's definitely you definitely need to be sure that that's something that you're passionate about doing. Whatever you're doing, that you should be passionate about it, and you will find opportunities to make it work. That's the best advice I could give. You'll have your ebb and flows as an entrepreneur. There's plenty of times it's like, oh shit, what did I do? And oh, I'm gonna go broke. Like I've definitely had that situation. Like literally, I invested $20,000 or something when we decided to go all in on the fiber network. And 3 weeks later, there's like a whole political situation in Nicaragua. Everything is totally different. The country's a whole different place. I'm like, what did I just make the hugest mistake of my life? Like, what was I thinking? But amazingly, that even that worked out. So, just if you're really passionate about it, things eventually do fall into place.
Brian, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great story, and I think that the reality is the field is changing a lot. As I mentioned earlier, I think that the sector is waking up a lot of the place to the need for technology and the value of technology. And I mean, some parts of it are slower than others. I think the UN was one of the early organizations that they started to really innovate on the digital front. So coming up, I used to look at them and the work that they were doing as an example of how things can be. And I think a lot of organizations are starting to pivot in that way as well. So there are definitely options, but the reality is you will be taking a pay cut relative to what Facebook is going to pay you, for example, or Google. That said, even within the corporate sector, there are small pockets of sort of social enterprise, tech for good work that's happening. I think that the private sector sort of carves out these little projects to maintain the sanity of some of their workforce that maybe feel like some of their work could be a tiny bit soul crushing. Having friends in many of those companies who wish that they could be doing more with their skills. So there's that option as well. And then within the nonprofit sector, I think that a lot of organizations are sort of waking up to the reality that in order to get good talent and good technical skills, they can't compete directly on salary, but they're paying a decent amount. And I think the benefits of working within the nonprofit sector are pretty. I mean, the rewards for your mental health and soul, I think, are pretty high, as well as like having. I mean, when I think about if I had to go back into the corporate sector and like the type of folks that I might have to deal with, it just makes me throw up a little in my mouth, and then I go back to work. So there's that. I mean, the reason I think the folks who are sitting in on this session are probably weighing those sort of hard choices, and I would say, go for it. There's space, and there's definitely need, and I'll speak to like technology fellows, which is a whole nother avenue. A lot of foundations, such as the Ford Foundation, Mozilla, they have a whole program of technology fellows that they're supporting, where they're taking early career technologists and sort of supporting them as sort of in-house technology experts within organizations, nonprofit organizations, social justice organizations, as a sort of entry point where the technologists sort of learn the field. They're exposed to the work and what it takes to do that kind of work. And then on the other hand, that organization benefits from seeing how technology can enhance and make their work more effective. So it's a win-win situation. And I think programs like that are expanding the opportunities for technologists within the sector. And then lastly, sort of being selfish on my part, the sort of philanthropic sector that funds a lot of this work is desperately in need of people who have a technical background to sort of be advocates for the funding of technology related projects. It's just one of my main sort of professional pet peeves is coming into a situation where a funder doesn't really understand the landscape of the technology. So they'll either fund poor technology or they'll just leave it alone altogether. And I think those are huge missed opportunities that could be alleviated with having more people in the space who understand technology and are passionate about advocating for the use of technology and creating a sort of a better experience for folks working in the nonprofit sector and for justice and rights overall.
So let me ask a question to you, Brian. What would you suggest to graduates who have that type of technical skill and are looking to make them? How would they basically best position themselves to move into those fields? Is this something that you could do kind of as you're working? Because the positions may not be full-time or whatever, but if someone wanted to test the waters, someone who may be working, say, for example, as like a product designer right now, but wasn't happy and wanted to move into your field, how would they go about making that transition, do you think? And have you seen that happen before?
Yeah. So one project that I was involved with was I mentioned the Mozilla Tech Fellows project. When they first rolled it out, one of the organizations that they placed the Tech Fellow in was Amnesty International, the International Secretariat in London. And they were able to place sort of a mid-career security engineer from Cisco into that position. So this is someone who wanted to, he had a family, he had like a career, he's on a career path. He wanted to do something else. To Cisco's credit, they let him take a sabbatical and do this. So I think that there are places that are sort of actively trying to facilitate these sorts of interactions and sort of cross-pollination between the for-profit and the nonprofit sector. And I would also suggest that within the companies, if you find yourself working within a Google or a Facebook, you probably there's probably a branch of the company that's doing something that's sort of social, corporate social responsibility or something sort of technology for good related. and to try and figure out how you can be involved in that work as well. And then there are a bunch of resources where nonprofits are listing jobs. I don't know if everyone knows about idealist.org, where a lot of these tech jobs for nonprofits are listed. And then check out the different fellowships. There's a whole movement around public interest technology, the same way that lawyers work pro bono that work in sort of private law firms, and you do pro bono work that has a public interest, and that's like a real legitimate branch of the law, of the legal field, and I think we're sort of moving in that direction in the technology field as well, where people who have technology backgrounds are looking for ways to apply those skills towards public interests.
That's me.
Same sort of rigor and ethical standards that you would in law.
Okay, we got about.
Could I jump in and maybe add just a bit?
Sure.
Okay, I'll keep it brief, but obviously, some of the big NGOs, INGOs, and NGOs, they all have websites in addition to idealist.org, which is an excellent recommendation. The UN system is a big door in towards this whole area. So I would encourage people, and I can send Midori or James lists of like sort of job sites if you want to kind of scan through them. But the big INGOs and NGOs are also definitely waking up to this whole area. The big hot skill areas are really data analytics, social media analysis, anything to do with big data, although that's less sexy now. But some of the bigger institutions, if you're thinking of going into this whole sector and you have a little bit of reticence about the pay cut, definitely you're going to get a pay cut in comparison to Facebook. But I'll just echo what the other speakers said. You're going to sleep better at night. I sleep 1,000 times better working for the UN than I did being a consultant for Dow Jones. And it's a different level of complicity. I hope that in 10 years I can be proud of myself when I describe what I'm doing to my children. And yeah, you could say I come from a privileged position to a degree in that I was able to get a graduate degree, but I didn't come from a position of privilege to begin with. So we just have to be really conscious. Also, I would say, yeah, as far as those big corporate entities for social responsibility, my friends, eyes wide open. Like Facebook just released an apology for their complicity, directly proven with data, for the anti-Muslim riots in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago. So you just have to be comfortable with yourself. You have to be comfortable with what you're willing to accept in terms of your responsibility, obviously, towards your own family and yourself. And that includes like your ability to survive, of course, but it also means like how we participate and as a group of engineers really participate and contribute to the larger body of expertise and on technology and its wise use in this world. So, I mean, I just encourage you to think about it a little bit more in like black and white. It's not so clear. Like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I first started, definitely I was one of the only people that was making a linkage between political information and technology. But it's not the same anymore. Go check out all the UN websites, go check out Idealists, check out the big NGOs, and you're going to find opportunities. And maybe they won't be comparable to out of the box Google or Facebook or whatever, but there might be other factors you could consider in the decision. I'm happy to share whatever materials that can help people make that good decision in comparison.
Cool. Edwin, I'm going to give you the last word because we're almost out of time here. We got a hard stop at 2:00, so I'm going to give you the last word if there's anything you want to add.
Sure. Just be passionate about what you're trying to do. I'm going to reference this question a little bit too because I see it here in the group chat. I've always been a proponent too of having a part-time permanent position. So having something that you can rely on just in case what your passion project doesn't work out. But just dream big and really go after whatever it is that you think that you want to go after. And I think that's one of the great things about ITP. It really expands the doors on what your possibilities are and what you can do in this world. And you should go after it, especially right after you graduate, where you seem to have that energy and that time to do it. And there's no perfect time, but this is the perfect time. So
yeah, in a lot of ways it is.
so there's a lot of innovation that is going to happen, that needs to happen, and we're here to do it, right? That's what we're trying to do. So
thank you. I want to say thank you to all of the panelists. I don't know, Midori, do you want to finish off with anything, or?
No, just thanks to all four of you for participating, giving your time. Christina, I didn't realize you were squeezing us in with all your work, but thank you again. I think the work you guys are doing is super important. Would really love to share those resources, and it's really encouraging to know that there are jobs and positions available. As you were saying, like the data and all of that. So. Just thank you so much for your time.
And another thing, I'm open to having anybody email me if they have any questions or whatever. So Midori, I don't know if that would be you, but
No, I'll probably email you. I'm coming off sabbatical, and I'm trying to.
Okay.
I got a whole lifestyle change thing that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, but anybody, students, anybody, I'm open to continuing this conversation or whatever. So
yeah,
all right.
same here.
Thank you all.
Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Danny, George.
Thank you.
Dano.
Take care, everyone.
Good luck.
See you, Midori. Thanks.